Electric and Analog is a branding and design studio. We work with essentially challenger brands to help them reinvent their brands. So, my dad was an abusive alcoholic who committed suicide when I was 11. I've been hijacked. I've had a gun stuck in my mouth and had the trigger pulled, and thank goodness it didn't go off. So we created a non-alcoholic beer called the 𝘀𝗵𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗶 by HEAPS NORMAL, and we launched it, and we got $2.5 million committed to the business with, I think, a 7.2 million valuation, and it seems to be making a difference. So super excited and can't wait to see what lies ahead.
I love your business. Like, your business it's cool. I'm always jealous. Like, mate, just give me some dot points. Give me the flow of the story.
It's been a bit of a weird ride for me in terms of the life journey. My dad was an abusive alcoholic who committed suicide when I was 11. I lost my mom and my nan within 6 months of each other when I was kind of early 20s. The design college I went to went bankrupt, so I actually don't have a design qualification, even though I run a design studio and I've worked in the industry for 20 years. I've been hijacked. I've had a gun stuck in my mouth and had the trigger pulled, and thank goodness it didn't go off. Weird things. An ex-CIA agent invested in our 3D photo app startup called 𝘀𝗵𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗶 a few years ago. I've pitched to the founder of SoftBank, who's one of the wealthiest men in the world, and he wore slippers and kicked us out after 3 minutes, and we still won the pitch, which is incredible. I've relocated to 3 different continents in my life. I recently turned down a job offer from Facebook, we almost sold our tech startup to one of China's largest multinationals, but Donald Trump arrested the CFO at the border, and the whole deal was called off. So it's been a bit of a weird ride, but here and telling the story, and super excited for what lies ahead. So Electric and Analog is a branding and design studio. We work with essentially challenger brands to help them reinvent their brand so that they really appeal to the audience, cut through the clutter, and create a brand that we call an electric brand, which is someone who really stands out from the crowd and encourages sales and makes everyone that works in those businesses, excited to go to work every day. Since we joined the Dent program, we kind of invented our process, our 6-step process to creating an electric brand. Suffered a little bit of impostor syndrome initially in terms of, is this really going to work? So we decided to create our own brand internally to kind of test the thesis. We went through a number of different names. We settled on a brand called HEAPS NORMAL, having lost my dad to alcohol addiction when I was pretty young. It was always something I wanted to do in the space. So we created this brand, and it was too good a brand to just be a fictional thing. The idea just felt too solid. So drafted in some friends, incorporated a business. We created a non-alcoholic beer called the 𝘀𝗵𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗶𝗹𝗶 by HEAPS NORMAL, and we launched it, and we got accepted into the StartMate Accelerator program with Blackbird Ventures. Pretty intense 12-week process, and at the end of that, went to open a round of funding. Our magic number was $1.1 million. To achieve kind of the KPIs we needed to achieve in the next few months. We opened the investment round on the Friday on demo day, and by Tuesday we'd had $2.5 million committed to the business in terms of actual hard commitments from a series of investors within the Blackbird and StartMate network. So we scaled everybody back. We settled on 1.4 with, I think, a 7.2 million valuation, and we now have a non-alcoholic beer that's been touted as the best tasting non-alc beer in Australia, which is flattering. And we're in about just over 300 independent retailers at the moment. We're talking to some of the chains as well. And we have a product that's really kind of making a difference and addressing a real problem. Like, it was initially me scratching my own itch, but the more we put it out there, there's just a number of other people, whether they just don't want to drink at all, or they've had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol like I have. And it seems to be making a difference. So super excited and can't wait to see what lies ahead.
I love your business. Like, your business it's cool. I'm always jealous. Like,
I love your business too.
Yeah, I know, right? The grass is always greener. When I look at Electric Analog, I love the name, but it's just sexy. There's something sexy about it. How do you make shit look so sexy?
This is a thing that really kind of got me into branding. It's like, we all have a lot of people have the desire to start a company and start a business, and you could be the best at doing what you do, but there's a number of different layers to how that works, as you know. So I think, the beauty of Dent is you guys look after the operational side and how we actually function, whereas, with electric and analog, we we want to make brands look and speak and appeal to their audience. And we've kind of figured out this process of how to do that. It's a 6-step process. It's super watertight. We're completely transparent with the client up front, and we go through a lot of questions and processes and figure out, do a lot of research and figure out exactly what's missing, and then have the right people on that project to really make that brand pop and stand for something and appeal to the people that it's trying to appeal to.
Tell me about this beer business. I got a box on the way, and like the site's dialed, and the story is dialed. And when I was reading it, I was thinking like Movember. I was thinking 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗹𝗶. I was thinking like there are a couple of brands out there that have just got this voice. They've got this tone. They've got this energy. They've got this fun, irreverent, really approachableness to it. And I love that so much. I've never quite been able to create that myself, and I'd love to understand the process of how a brand agency goes and builds a hypothetical beer business and then it becomes a real beer business. Like, how does that work? How do you start a brand from scratch?
For me personally, I think every business needs, and it sounds so cliched, but I think every business really needs to solve a genuine problem. And we learned this the hard way. My brother and I started a 3D app called 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗹𝗶 years and years ago. We managed to raise some funding, and it was amazing. We could an app that captured 3-dimensional photos. We went to Web Summit in Dublin, made the top 10 startups 3 years in a row, and essentially failed because we ran out of money, but we weren't solving a problem. Like, people thought it was cool, it had some nice functionality, but it wasn't actually a problem to be solved. So that was a massive, massive learning curve. Then, obviously starting the branding studio, again, a lot to learn there. When we started, it's funny because you think you're good at something, and I feel like you could be the best brand designer in the world. Not saying that I am, but you could be the best branding designer in the world. But when you start a brand design business, you need to learn how to operate a company and a business, and that's been the biggest wake up call for me. So,
Whole different thing, right?
yeah, 100%. And electric and analog for me was, it was essentially me being a freelancer initially. Pretending to be a company and designing stuff of my own. I then realized there was people out there that were way better designers than I was. So I took on a guy named 𝗁𝗏, who's an incredibly talented designer who works for us. I guess Mark and I working together and also working with you guys through the Dent KPI program, we kind of established the 6-step process to creating an electric brand. So it starts with discovery and research, where we go really deep on what the problem is, who the audience we're trying to appeal to, what that might look like. Then we go into what we call concept development. So concept development is we come up with essentially three brands, like very, very top line, like a logo, lockup, identity, color palette, and typography. And we kind of feel see what that feels like. And then we move into design development. So if we were working with a client, for example, we would get the feedback. Normally how it goes is, I love concept 1, hate concept 2. There's something about concept 3 I'm really into, I'm not sure what it is. We kind of draw that information out. And then what we do is we go back and in the next phase, which is design development, we kind of obviously put all that feedback back into the machine, and it spits out, ideally what we hope is a 80 to 90% there beautiful brand that the client's really happy with. And there's rounds of changes and revisions, that are within scope of each section of that. We then go into the rollout phase, which is when we create assets, and whether it be websites or animated explainer videos or a brand film, really kind of showing the story of the founders and how that comes together. And then we roll that whole thing out across a brand Bible, which typically is anything from a 60 to 100-page document that has all the rules and regulations of a brand, the values, the brand values, the vision, mission, purpose that we work through with the client as well. So with HEAPS NORMAL, it was one of those things where we kind of invented this process. We've been playing with this idea of having a non-alcoholic beer. I mean, it probably makes sense to go back into my story a little bit. Having lost my dad to alcoholism pretty young. I always kind of grew up in that shadow. And particularly my young, like early 20s, I was born in England. I moved to South Africa when I was 10. And then when I was kind of like 22, I moved back to the UK and lived in London because all my friends were doing that. And I was this young guy with a bit of money and single and in London and away from home, and had what I would say was an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. So, going out and just acting like a hooligan and getting in trouble and, starting fights with people for no reason, and couldn't remember how I got home the next day and things like that. So it was always something that I was aware of, I was conscious of, I wanted to do something about it. But then you kind of get into that situation where it's like, all right, well, if I'm going to go out for dinner tonight, like I'm going to have a glass of wine or a beer because everyone's doing it. Otherwise, I sit there with a Coca-Cola or a Fanta and just look weird, and everyone talks about it. So there was this whole kind of, peer pressure thing that I grew up with, and I just never really enjoyed it. So I went through phases of being kind of reclusive, where I just wouldn't go out because I didn't want to be around it, or I'd go out and then just, either be in control or lose control a little bit, and just not be in a good place for, a few days afterwards. So, for me, with HEAPS NORMAL, it was always like I always wanted to do something in the space. Before it was called HEAPS NORMAL, we kind of we put it through the process, and we came up with these brands one was called 𝗀𝗶𝗹𝗶𝗀, and one was called Free Beer, and because it was going to be alcohol free. And then essentially I reached out to a good friend of mine named Andy Miller, who worked for a pretty well-known craft beer company here in Sydney. I just said, hey, like, I got this idea for a non-alc beer. Like, what do you think? And I'd shopped it around to a few friends that had worked at breweries before, and just got shut down. Just was told, this is never going to work. There's not really a market for it. It's not what we do. We can't get involved in this. So I felt a little bit deflated, and went and chatted to Andy about it. And we were sitting in a pub having a beer, like talking about this thing. And he was like, look, the biggest concern was the liquid, right? The product. So for that to work, we had to get a really good brewer. So we reached out to a friend of Andy's named Benny Holdstock, who is a really established head brewer. He's worked for a number of craft beer companies in Sydney over the last 10 years or so. And we ran it past him, and he's up for a challenge. And he just said, look, I've never done this before, but let me do a few kind of home brews in the kitchen. And I think he did 4 or 5 of them. And before we got it tasting really good. And then we scaled up with our brew partner called Brick Lane in Victoria, and said, all right, we've got this recipe that we can make, 5 liters. How do we scale this up to make 50 hectoliters and produce our first batch? So we worked very closely with John, their head brewer there, to kind of get that to a good point. And we made this beer. We made our first run of kind of 50 hectoliters of beer. We created this beer, and we put it in blank cans, and we put stickers on them. And we sent them out to a few people and just said, hey, like, what do you think of this beer? And we kind of blind tasted it with some friends who were like sommeliers and barmen who worked in pubs and bars and stuff like that, and really knew the product really well. And the initial reaction was, oh, it's really nice. It's an extra pale ale. It's an XPA. And we said to them, well, what do you think the ABV is? And they said, oh, I'll be like 4.5 to 5%. And we told them it was non-alcoholic, and we just saw jaws hitting the floor. And for us, that was kind of the thing to go, okay, the product's there, like it could use some tweaking and refining. So we kind of went back to the drawing board on the product and got it into a really good place. And then we kind of rolled out the brand. So we really established who our target audience were. We knew it was going to be kind of probably a bit of a youthful demographic. Like
to that point of coming up with a concept, shopping around, to, I guess, getting that taste test kind of validation. What's the timeline there?
So that was from very top line idea stage to thinking about it every day and really trying to become something, to actually having a beer in hand, was about 18 months from start to finish. And that was, there was a number of reasons for that, purely because I had a full-time gig running Electric and Analog as a branding design studio, and client work to get done, and the business to manage. So it was very much a side hustle. And like I said, I had a lot of doors closed in my face, like talking to contract brewers and established breweries, and asking for advice and help, and was kind of like politely laughed out the room to an extent. So that put kind of a bit of a drag on things, because I started doubting whether this was a worthwhile thing to pursue, and whether it was a sustainable business that we could make. But for me, the catalyst was having that meeting with Andy, and then him pulling Benny in. and going, let's give this a crack. So we were 18 months from idea to actually having a can in hand and getting people to taste it.
Mate, that's wild. And from that point?
It happened really, really quickly. We did kind of the 6 week process to create the brand, which we settled on the name HEAPS NORMAL, with the hashtag too good to be wasted, which we're really proud of. And we started kind of sending blank cans with a sticker on them out to people within our network, within our wider network that we knew had a little bit of influence, just to get their feedback and see what they thought. And one of those people that got their hands on it was a guy named Nick Crocker. And Nick Crocker is a partner at Blackbird Ventures. Really, really amazing dude, good friends with Andy. And the process went like this. Nick said, hey, I'm fully into the non-alc beer space. You guys should apply to get into StartMate. You'll never get in because we're predominantly more of a tech-focused VC firm, but it'll be really good for you guys to go through the process, just answer the questions, get you thinking differently about your business, and it'll probably be really helpful. So we jumped in and we filled out the application process. They had, I believe, 600 and something startups apply. They took 12. We got shortlisted into the top 30, which was speed dating with a whole bunch of investors and mentors, which took about 3 hours to do online through Zoom. This was just as COVID had kicked off. And we went through the process and we did our elevator pitch and we interviewed the speed dating thing with all these investors. And we finished that meeting and we thought, okay, we've had some really good practice. We're super stoked. Let's crack on. And within a few days, we got a phone call and basically saying you guys have got in. If you wanted to get in, how it works is StartMate invest a little bit of money into the business to kind of kick you off. And then you obviously part with a little bit of equity. So we had $1 million valuation from that in terms of how that works, which we were pinching ourselves because we were like, we've got a beer in a can that's non-alcoholic that we've had a lot of people telling us is not really a thing and is not going to work, to all of a sudden having this network of investors that are really excited to help us out. And we're talking like some pretty big names like Kate Morris from Adore Beauty and Danny Millen from Koala Mattresses and Simon Griffiths from 𝘀𝗵cie𝘁, like some really influential people who have walked the walkway before us and got a really incredible business to show for it. So it was an intense 12 weeks of kind of mentoring and ticking boxes and doing what we had to do. And when we got to the end of that process, how it works is your mentor squad work with you to figure out what your magic number is that you want to raise. So for us, our goal was to make a certain amount of beer in the next 12 to 18 months. We had a few key hires that we needed to make. So our magic number was $1.1 million. So our mentors kind of work with us through that process, going, all right, these are the people we think. And then on demo day, which is the last day of the 12-week program, we essentially get up on stage, obviously virtually because of COVID in this instance, but do our pitch and, present our idea and our traction and that we've had in the 12 weeks of the program. And on that Friday, we opened our funding round. So it was it was our seed stage. We're looking for $1.1 million, and we opened that at the end of demo day on the Friday. By the Tuesday, the next week, like 4 days later, we'd had $2.5 million committed to the business, and we were just pinching ourselves, like going, this is impossible. And we had a lead investor named 𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, who is an incredible human being who came involved, said, right, I'm going to look after this whole thing. I'm going to be your lead investor. He put a pretty serious amount of money in, managed all the due diligence, and kind of helped us through that process of scaling other investors back. People wanted to put in $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. We got them down to 100, 150, 180, 50K here and there, with the strategy of having that wider network of people involved in the business that could really fill those gaps that we had by bringing their expertise to the table as opposed to turning them down. So there was that conversation of like, should we take more money, but we'd have to part with more equity, and we'd kind of capped it on what we wanted to release in terms of equity for that round. So we brought it down to 1.4 mil, and going through the process within a few weeks, we had money in the bank, and we're now striving forward. We've got we actually had a dinner last night with the team, which has been the first time in a while because of COVID. Everyone's working remotely, obviously, but we've got there's 7 of us now in the business. We've got an operations manager. We've got a marketing intern. We've got a marketing manager starting next week. We've got a couple of salespeople, and we are we're in about just over 300 independents around Australia at the moment, and it's literally growing every day. So it really is kind of pinch yourself stuff.
How did you get into 300 so fast? It feels like that's fast.
We shopped it around to a lot of people. We sent out a lot of free, free samples just to get things rolling. And obviously, Andy and Benny working in the space for the last, better part of the last 10 years, had a lot of connections in that space. So we really kind of leveraged our network and with that and sent out a bunch of free samples. And it's weird because, with our 3D app with Viewpop, it was interesting because you tell people you got a 3D app, and when you show it to them, the whole reaction changes. And it was exactly the same here. We're talking about a non-alcoholic beer, and the initial reaction is, oh, that's kind of cute. And but when they crack a can and taste an ice cold non-alcoholic beer and go, hang on, this tastes like a really good beer. I'm not going to be hungover tomorrow. I'm probably going to not be arguing with my partner because I'm going to come home like a drunk idiot, and I'm going to be able to go to work the next day, or go for a surf in the morning, or go to gym, or whatever those things are that I value. It's changed people's mindsets. Like we get DMs daily on on our socials, just of people going, I've been looking for this for years, and like really heartfelt messages of pretty heavy personal journeys that people have been through, and this is kind of fixing a problem for them. And it's like it's broken all our expectations of kind of age barriers and demographics. We went to Canberra for a road trip a few weeks before Christmas, and walked into one of the bottle shops that stock HEAPS NORMAL, and chatting to the owner, and we said, oh, how's it all going? And he starts flying, and it's brilliant. And I said to him, typically like younger male skew, right, coming in. He goes, funny you should say that. We had a 90-something-year-old man come in yesterday. He'd just been to the doctor. His doctor said, you cannot drink alcohol ever again. And he said, I've drunk beer every single night of my life since I was about 15 years old. And I don't know what to do. And he walked in this bottle shop, and he said, probably a stupid question, is there such a thing as non-alcoholic beer? And the bottle shop owner went, funny you should say that. We just took stock of these guys yesterday. So he bought a 4-pack there and then, went home, drank a couple of them, came back the next day, bought 2 cases, and said, this has changed my life. Like, I can have a beer, I can go to the pub with my mates, which is like my community of people that I talk to. Like he lost his wife, like going to the pub and hanging out with the boys was his thing. That was his church, So the doctor said, you can't do that anymore. And he didn't want to sit there and have a Coke. And now he's sitting there drinking a HEAPS NORMAL, and, all is good in the hood again. So there's those stories. And then, we're in I live in Manly, and there's a bottle shop here called Winona, which is a really awesome bottle shop. We went in there the other day, and we said to them, how's it all going? They said, oh, we had these young dudes come in, and they all bought like a 4-pack each, and they were going out partying, and to the point where the girl behind the counter said, these are non-alcoholic, right? And the guys went, yeah, we know. We want to get up and go surfing in the morning, and we got to go to work. We're working on Saturday, so we just don't want to get pissed, and we want to be clear-headed in the morning. So it's kind of, it feels like it's really, I don't want to say creating a movement because it sounds so wank, but I feel like there's people that are really buying into what we're doing. We've had really kind of steady organic growth. It's not being like a quick, like kind of mad rush to get things up and running. We're taking our time. We're doing it right. We're making sure the team's right. We're making sure the product's right. And it feels like we're onto something. So I jump out of bed every morning to do what we do, which is super exciting.
How is your relationship with your dad now? I know he's passed, but this has been very much an outgrowth of a childhood story. There's got to be some reflection on that, I'm sure.
You're gonna make me cry, Glenn. It's a really poignant question for me, because how it all went with my dad was, we're gonna go deep here. Are you ready for this?
Mate, it's called the Dent Podcast for a reason.
Okay. When my dad passed away, my mom told us that it was an accident. We were pretty young. I was 11, my brother was 9. I think she was trying to shield us from the truth because it was pretty gory and horrible. So we kind of lived with that for a long time. And when we were late teens and watching movies and realizing that people who have guns, don't accidentally shoot themselves, we started asking a lot of questions. And the ultimate conversation happened where we were sat down and told, look, mom just told us that to kind of protect us, and it was actually done on purpose, and there was a suicide note and all that kind of stuff like that. So I feel like we kind of almost went through it twice in a way, and my probably young naive reaction to that was just to hate my dad for that. Like I think it's the most selfish thing anybody can do. um, I, I never understood it. I resented him for it. And that was how I lived. And I grew up with a chip on my shoulder. I had to win everything I did as a kid. Like I grew up surfing and always had to be the best. And, at school and sports. And I was always trying to, just had this weird chip on my shoulder because I think I was bitter about what had happened. Um, since having kids on my own, of my own, not on my own. Obviously, I have a wife who had our children. It's changed my perspective on. Yeah, it's really changed my perspective, and I think particularly running a business, the pressures and the stress that's involved. I've kind of started to understand the way that it went for my dad, and if anything, it's given me clarity on what my mission and my purpose is. So, although Heaps Normal is a huge part of my life now, like out of nowhere, um, electric and analog and creating brands is my reason and my purpose and my why and all that kind of stuff. And I never really knew what that meant for a very long time. Like I always thought, I'd heard of Simon Sinek's Start with Why and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of like, yeah, yeah, cool. And I never really got it. And in year two of running Electric and Analog, I'd taken on a business partner. Long story short, and we've spoken about this because I know you've been through a similar thing as well, Glenn, but it didn't work out. We parted ways. It cost me money that I didn't really have, and it put me in a bit of a shitty headspace. And I started kind of resenting things, started feeling not good about what I was doing, like started doubting everything I was doing, and essentially had full burnout like 2 years ago. With that, I started speaking to people in my network who'd been through similar things. Some incredible people like Andrew Wright, who runs Never Not Creative, which is a mental health kind of not-for-profit for the creative industry. Nathan Birch, who's the CEO of Interbrand in Australia, who's been through it as well. And I just got taught a lot of things like journaling and gratitude and getting up early and doing exercise and just sweating and all that kind of stuff like that, that really, really helps when you're not feeling yourself and when you're feeling kind of a little bit down in the dumps. And through that, I started journaling a lot, and I started realizing, like, we get up every day to make brands, but for me, for a long time, particularly in the early stages of the business, it was very much a money thing. Like I enjoyed making brands. We didn't really have a system and a process in place. It was kind of everything was custom made for every client we worked with. But there wasn't really a why. And going through the process of, I guess, the kind of the burnout and the, like, call it what you want, breakdown, burnout, whatever you want to call it, and kind of looking into myself and really trying to come through that, it made me realize, like, what my dad went through. My dad was a multi-millionaire when we were kids. We had houses in Spain and the Cotswolds and speedboats and Mercedes and Jaguars and everything. And when he passed away, he was declared bankrupt, which nobody in my family to this day can understand. And it made me realize, like, the pressure he must have been under. And I started thinking, like, how can I stop somebody else, like another kid, having to go through that, living with, growing up without a dad? It's a weird thing to get your head around. Like all my other friends had dads that were part of their lives, and I'd never, and always felt like the odd one out, and I never enjoyed it. I kind of felt sorry for myself in my teenage years growing up, and wallowed in the self-pity. So when I was in the kind of coming out of this burnout phase a couple of years ago, I really started trying to understand, like, how I could help. And for me, it's like, people who run businesses, whether you're an entrepreneur or a CMO of a big company, or whatever your position is, like, if you're under that much pressure where you can think about literally ending your life, there's got to be something that we can do to stop that happening again. And for me, being a brand builder, it's sometimes it's very obvious, like this. I mean, I'm sure it's the same for you, because I feel like what Dent do and what we do is almost like the same audience. It's business owners. It's not the early stage startup. It's kind of people who have established a company and are a little bit stuck. And I think what Dent provides is an absolute game changer. And if that stuff that you guys do isn't right, I think no matter what anybody does to a company, it's still the fundamentals aren't going to be right, which is where Dent for us completely changed the game, having systems and processes and procedures and ways to do things and templates to work from. We never had that. And I think once you get that and your business starts ticking along, it is a game changer. But what I went through as kind of, coming out of this turmoil headspace was trying to think, like, how can I actually genuinely add value to people within our network, like people we're working with. And in the early days, it's kind of like, at least for me as a business owner in the early days, I said yes to everything. Like a brief would come along. I kind of didn't know if we could do a really good job. I doubted our kind of our value in providing what we could provide to this client, but I saw a dollar sign on it and we said yes. And then that adage of like an entrepreneur jumps out of an airplane and figures out how to build a parachute. It was that kind of thinking, which in hindsight was disastrous because now we've got a brief. We've got 50% of the invoice paid up front. We don't really know how to do it. We're outsourcing the work to other people and essentially making no margin and becoming a really busy project manager with an annoyed client. And going through that process, particularly the burnout side of things, at one stage we called ourselves a creative agency, and it's so dangerous because you're a jack of all trades, master of none. We were doing marketing things and content creation and a bit of design work and a bit of branding. And I think coming through the Dent program for me was like, niching into what we do and what we do well at and only doing those things. So we are a branding and design studio. Those are the only things that we do. And, back to the burnout thing and trying to find purpose and why and reasoning and all that kind of stuff. It literally took me back to what I went through with my dad. It was like, well, he was in such a dark headspace to allow him to do what he did. How can I stop that ever happening to anybody again? And it sounds like a big hairy, audacious goal, and it absolutely was. But when you break that down and you're looking at people that are, pouring everything they have into their business, like it's their work, it's their passion, it's their life, it's late nights, it's working 8 days a week, it's just, and from a brand, looking at it through a branding lens and going, you don't have a brand, we could come in and work with you to create a brand for an investment that's going to give you a solid return. I think there's a conversation to be had with those kind of businesses. And what's really funny is before Dent, it was a really hard sell for us. Like we would cold call and we'd all our work was referrals and, we'd any sniff of a brief, we'd say yes. After coming through the burnout on the personal side and the Dent program, everything changed. It was like, how can we genuinely help and genuinely provide value to the people we're working with? And if we can't, how can we leverage our network to introduce the right people to these people that need help? So, a really nice example, like when COVID kicked off, we had a number of prospects that we essentially had sign off on briefs and proposals had been approved, just stopped, just put on pause, obviously because of COVID and everyone was panicking, and it left a pretty big, like about a 300 grand hole in our business, and we were just going, oh my gosh, like how are we going to get out of this? So what we did was I reached out to a bunch of people that I knew in Sydney that ran similar businesses to us but complementary. So whereas we're a branding studio, we've got friends who do specialize in e-commerce websites and PR for founder-led businesses and SEO and content creation and media buying and all these things. And we created this initiative called 𝘀𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗀.io. And essentially what that is functioning like a full service agency, but every kind of piece of the puzzle is an independent founder-led business with the agreement that we're not going to charge full price because we're not here to make a buck through COVID, and we're also trying to survive just like you are. And if we can, at least cover our costs and make a little bit of margin and provide value and help you through this as well, then it's worth having a conversation. And it worked really well. It's warm referrals from people that we trust and clients that would really kind of trust us with their input and their problems, and we genuinely see if we can help. So I feel like electric and analog has completely transformed in the last kind of year and a half since, one, having burnout personally, and two, joining the Dent program, because it just really allowed us to figure out who we're trying to work with, whether we can actually help. If we can't help, who can we bring in that can help them, and just being of service, and that never previously that never appealed to me. It was always like, all right, how are we going to pay rent and payroll? And it's a game changer when you kind of realize that, if we can change somebody's brand and change their business, which is why I think there's a lot of similarities with what you guys do, is, I mean, we rebranded a tea company, a Byron Bay tea company, a couple of years ago, and I recently spoke to the owner, and she's like, she contacted us. The business was 14 years old. Revenue hadn't really changed in the last 3 or 4 years, and she was like, "What do I do?" So we conducted a pretty intense kind of rebrand process that went on for a few months, and that was wrapped up 18 months, 2 years ago. Speaking to her recently, like, her business has changed. She's got businesses flying. She's in a whole another realm of kind of revenue streams that she's created, and people are really buying into it. She's exporting overseas. She's doing all sorts of things. And it is the sum of all parts. Like, we can't take all the credit for that, but I think having a brand that really connects with people, really talks to your audience, makes a really big difference. And the thing that's really kind of tricky is people don't really understand brand. Like, we get people come to us, go, "Oh, can you do our marketing for us?" And we're not a marketing agency. And I always say, marketing is what you tell people about your business. Branding and brand is how people feel about your business. So there's a reason that, people wait in the queue and, spend $4,000 on a pair of, Nike collectors pair of shoes, because they cost the same amount of money as a $80 pair of Vans. You know what I mean? But people buy into brand because that brand stands for something. And it's interesting to see how many people just don't quite realize that. And I think there's a conversation to be had whether, do we start with a brand and launch out the door and invest in branding, or do we kind of do the MVP lean startup approach where we get some traction and we prove the concept and then we start investing in brand? So it's been the last couple of years have been an absolute game changer for me personally, and for Electric and Analog as a studio.
So what's your relationship more, well, both, I suppose, into like emotionally and logistically between HEAPS Normal and Electric and Analog? Because you've got this tiger by the tail, it sounds like, which is taking off. It started off as a side hustle. It can't possibly be a side hustle anymore, I'm assuming. And so then you've got this creative brand agency, which is like the joy, and it's the birthplace of this new thing. But this new thing is obviously, a rocket ship. How are you navigating that?
Really interesting one, that is, and there's a few layers to it. So when HEAPS Normal started clearly becoming something, in all honesty, I felt a little bit out of my depth. There was things where, to run a beer company like I'd never run before, like I'd never even worked for a beer company. So had a very serious conversation with my co-founders and just said, hey, I literally get out of bed to make brands. It excites me more than anything. And at the same time, HEAPS Normal is really starting to take off, and we're solving a real problem that excites me more than anything too. So I'm currently splitting my time between the two businesses. We've got people in the studio and people in the beer company that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And I'm splitting my time between both, and they both get me equally as excited. Just reading the comments and the feedback we get from HEAPS Normal it literally makes you, brings a tear to your eye. But being able to actually work with clients and reinvent their brands and recreate their brands is something that I don't think I'll ever tire of. Like, it's different every time, and we go super micro. Like, Mark and I are such nerds when it comes to like typography and color palettes, and like I drive my wife crazy. We'll go for dinner and I'll start, looking at the font on the menu, and she's just like, "Oh my gosh, like, what are you doing?" And it's something that we fanaticize about. Like, a shade of a blue could mean so many different things, and how do we bring that into life to match the brand strategy? So I can't ever see myself not building brands, but I think it's probably fair to say the proof's in the pudding with HEAPS Normal. I think we've created something that really stands for something, and is really getting traction and is getting noticed, which makes me realize that what we do as a branding studio is really valuable to businesses.
And how does it? Have you got a co-owner? I think you mentioned before, but have you got a co-owner in Electric Analog?
I do. I have a family friend named David Penfold, who's the ex-CFO of Deutsche Bank, who's a kind of our unofficial chairman and a minority shareholder in the business. So he's kind of the adult that we go to for advice when we need help and advice with things. But in the most part, it's me kind of running that on my own. We run the business lean. We had a studio at WeWork in Piermont for 4 years, and then when COVID kicked off, we kind of all work from home. I'm sitting in my home studio at the moment. Mark's working from home too. We try and catch up in person as much as we can with client meetings and things like that. And then we've got 14 freelancers that are kind of experts in the fields of animation and art direction and videography and all that kind of stuff that we can pull into projects as and when we need. So the beauty of that is we're not a big branding agency with receptionists and big offices and overheads and have to charge a premium price. Like we'd never race to the bottom on price. It's just not how we operate. But it's nice to think that we don't have those huge overheads. We can be cost effective, and we can bring the right people on as and when we need for each project to make sure that as the customer, you're getting the real cream of the crop in terms of what's out there to work on your brand.
And did you, with HEAPS Normal and the equity position, did you have Electric and Analog as an entity also like co-own a percentage of that, or is it just you separately and they're two totally different things?
Yeah, we've kept them separate. I mean, it's all through the equity's all owned through a family trust and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure you know how all that works. I'm still trying to figure it out, but yeah, they're very, very separate. I just think they're two separate businesses, and it probably it makes sense to keep them individual.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, if someone's listening in, and they're probably now seeing that, all right, brand, message, voice, the way we show up in the world, I mean, that's a big part of what our audience is interested in as well. And you're really good on, the execution of that from like you said, from the typography and the font, the palette and all that, like getting all that dialed in. Of course, that's a small part of the expression of it, or that is the expression part of it. And it goes deeper than that. For someone that's an everyday small business that's not going to throw 50 to 150 grand at you type thing. I mean, people spend what they'd spend on a Porsche kind of working with you guys type thing. But taking that expertise, let's say you got someone who's doing, $1 million a year, but you look at their website and it's a brochure. You look at their messaging and it's functional. They're talking, they're talking about like speeds and feeds as opposed to thinking different, in Steve Jobs kind of talk. What do you say to that person?
In my experience, it can't be a hard sell. The minute I go into sales mode and start really pushing a sale and it's falling on deaf ears and getting pushed back, it's never going to work. So what I try and do is kind of educate the client, show some case studies, show things that are relevant. We are quite particular in how we work.
If I can.
Okay.
No, not from a client perspective, right? Because these are people that are way small for you anyway. I'm just more like the philosophy and principles of branding. Like what should they be thinking about? Like if they were to kind of reorient themselves, step back from their business and kind of go through some of the first principles of making the decision to go, I don't want this to just be a business, I want it to be a brand. Right? So forget about like the client process or something like that, but just at the level of having a conversation about brand, how does someone begin to even orient themselves to that if it's not something they understand, not something that they do? And like there's this concept of like, okay, I could outsource it and hire an agency, but it's like, what would you say to kind of connect a founder to the philosophy or the core principles or first principles behind brand?
Branding matters because it's how people feel about your company, and it's what people say when you're not in the room. Essentially, that's how a good way to describe what branding is. And there's seven core components of a brand. It's logo, color, typography, imagery, your tone of voice, your design, and your positioning. And it really does depend on who you're trying to talk to, what those 7 components look like. And you can see it everywhere you go. There's essentially there's always 3 responses to a piece of design, or a brand. It's either yes, no, or a wow. That's something 𝘀𝗶𝗹𝗹𝗶𝗀 said, he's the designer who did the I Heart NY kind of logo. So, as a business owner, I think if you're not wowing people and getting people in the door and piquing people's interest, there's a massive missed opportunity there, because you're relying on the work that you do, and you're relying on, word of mouth, and you're relying on referrals, whereby if you have a brand that stands for something, you're really going to cut through the clutter and engage with the people that you're trying to engage with. My biggest kind of, I wouldn't say issue, but my biggest concern with companies that we see a lot of is people spending a ton of money on marketing when the brand isn't right. And I wrote an opinion piece recently and saying, spending money on marketing when you don't have a brand, it's like putting petrol into a car that doesn't have any wheels on it. Like, there's no point. So people are buying Instagram ads and Facebook ads and spending on social and digital and websites when the brand isn't actually cutting through and talking to people. So it's really important that brand is connecting people. Like, on the spectrum of your competitors, like, what do you look like? Why is the market leader getting all the traction and all the business, and you're, as a business owner, still kind of hustling day in, day out, wondering why things aren't connecting, wondering why the door's not not being bust open by people who need what you do. So I think it's a really, really important thing. Obviously it sounds kind of what's the word, bias coming from me because I run a branding studio, but like I said, like, we wouldn't, if there's someone that we couldn't help, there's just no point in kind of working with them. So I think it's important to figure out who our audience is, in the same way that another business that we're working with knows who their audience is. Like, we're a founder-led independent branding studio. So if we were going to go and do, a $1 million rebrand for Nike, we wouldn't be able to deliver on that, because it'd be too big a project. There'd be too much red tape. We wouldn't have the manpower. Similarly, if a client came to us and said, we've got $100, there's websites for that. You can go into 99designs.com and literally spend $100 for a logo. I feel like Electric and Analog sits in the middle of those two. We have a clear kind of defining kind of criteria on who we work with. It's essentially challenger brands, ideally 7 to 8 figure turnover businesses, and people that know that investing in brand is going to give them a return on their investment.
You got attracted to this idea of you as the founder leading from the front more, right? And being more effective at communicating, like, the vision, the values, the value proposition. That's not something that most people are into. Like, most people want to kind of hide behind the business and build a faceless business. And look, I mean, even with HEAPS NORMAL, like, you've got your 4 key people. I mean, their face isn't on the can, but they definitely bring a story together. How do you, what was your journey around this recognition of, like, oh, I've got to be more of that mouthpiece for the business, as opposed to just having it as the business brand? That would be, I guess, question 1. And question 2 is just the follow on in terms of, to what degree, if at all, do you work with brands to integrate that founder brand piece as well?
Yeah. So the first part of that question for me initially was just fear, like, genuinely just straight up fear. Like, I don't like the sound of my own voice. Nobody does. There was a lot of impostor syndrome creeping in. If you want to listen to a great TED talk, listen to Michael Cannon-Brookes on TED Talk, talking about impostor syndrome. As a founder of Atlassian, a billionaire who still walks into meeting rooms thinking he shouldn't be there because he's not that clever and doesn't know what he's talking about. So, the realization of that being normal and real, and no one likes to be in front of a camera, and no one likes the sound of their own voice, was a big kind of moment of realization for me. And also, being a key person of influence, which you guys do so well, there's so much opportunity. And I think, love them or hate them, I come from the Gary Vaynerchuk kind of, I did, at least for a long time, of the hustle harder. But if you're not actually putting yourself out there and you're working stupid hours and all weekend and not getting traction, that's where I was before I came across Dent and you. and I was banging my head against the wall. I was exhausted. I wasn't sleeping. I was, we weren't getting the traction we wanted to get. And it just felt so daunting to put myself out there. And once you get over that, and like, you literally have to get over yourself and go, all right, well, we've got one crack at this. This life is not a dress rehearsal. I'm going to throw myself into this properly with both feet and see how we come out. And, just the opportunities that's presented itself. Like, I mean, if it wasn't for COVID, I'm doing a virtual talk in Düsseldorf in Germany next week. I was supposed to be flying to Russia in November to do a talk. All because I did my first keynote at Pause Fest in February, put it online, and it got traction and it got noticed, and people started talking about it, and it's opened up a whole new kind of realm of opportunities for me personally and for us as a business. So I think really putting yourself out there and just getting over the shyness and the awkwardness is 100% step number one.
What's been your experience of that? Like, how do you do it? Like, how do you? So I often get this, which is like, people kind of recognize that I should be out there more, and they have that fear, doubt, insecurity, imposter monster, don't like the sound of my own voice. Like, how did you personally circle that square? Did you just like suck it up and go like do it, like, or did you have some kind of process for pushing yourself through that discomfort?
The process for pushing myself through the discomfort was the kind of the burnout I'd had previously, and just feeling so stuck and so overwhelmed, and so the dialogue you're having with yourself is like, why do I do this? Like, what? Like, am I really helping anybody? And then realizing, coming out of that and journaling and talking and getting it out in the open and getting feedback from people, and realizing that, what we do does make a difference, and then go, what, fuck it. Like, let's go hard on this, man. I'm not like, I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to be around forever. I'm still a spring chicken in the grander scheme of things, but like, now's the time to, rubber to the road, let's go. So, that was a big thing for me, was just kind of getting over the whole, like, moping around and just going, all right. And I think for me, like, purpose is everything. I always say I have two purposes. I have a work purpose and my personal purpose. And I've got a beautiful wife named Nikki. I've got two beautiful children, Frankie and Lex, and a bulldog, and they're everything to me. And I don't want my kids to grow up without a dad because I was in a shitty headspace and I did something unforgivable like my dad did. So that's my personal why. And then my work why is, if I can go to work and rebrand someone's business, makes them so excited to go to work every day because they're convinced that the proof's in the pudding and their brand is cutting through the clutter and, getting through the noise and really appealing to their audience and getting inquiries and more business on the board and more runs on the board. Like, for me, that's everything. Like, that's a personal why and a work why. And when those two things come together, it's really magic.
And how do you do that in terms of electric and analog, if you do it at all? Because I know many branding and brand creative agencies don't do anything with the founder, and it's just with the actual business itself. Like, it's the business brand, it's the product brand, but there's no founder brand, CEO brand, whatever it is, as much of a component. To what degree does that factor?
So we actually haven't done a lot of personal branding. It's more been companies. So that's probably not a good question, to be completely frank, unless there's something you want me to say around that in particular. But
why is it not a good question?
Well, we just don't have the experience. I've never really worked on a personal brand before. I think our rebrand has been small founder-led businesses, where I think, if anything, you guys are the personal brand people, right? That's what the KPI
Man, I'm just curious. Like, I don't have an agenda for you to say it's really important to work on the founder brand or not. Like, I'm just curious in understanding the process. Like, this podcast is just it's a chat. I love chatting to our clients, but I don't have an agenda. I'm really curious in terms of how other people approach business, other people approach their art. I don't ever think that we've got the only way to do it. We're very specialized in what we do, but clearly becoming a key person of influence isn't the only way to build a successful business. And in fact, we often say, if you're already doing like multiple millions in revenue, Yeah, it's not the same force. If you're already there, it's not the same force multiplier as if you're in the early stages. Like it's certainly a starter motor. So, man, don't feel like you got to respond in some way that's going to say something that I want to hear. Like, I'm actually just genuinely interested in terms of your process for building brand, and if that factors or not. Because in Heaps Normal, like, you got a couple of buttons there. You got like buy the beer, and then you've got our story and your story, and the story starts with you four guys.
Well, in my personal experience, like, people buy from people, and here's how strongly I feel about this. Like, our terms of business, if you click on the footer of our website for Electric and Analog and go to terms, we literally say in there, we don't work B2B or B2C, we work H to H, human to human. And I think it's really important because people talk about B2B, and yes, of course, businesses work with businesses, but you've got people inside those businesses working with other people inside those businesses. So from my perspective, and my honest opinion is that, you need to put your face out there. You need to be the name of the business. I would rather engage with a company where I know the people that I'm talking to, as opposed to not knowing who they are and it's just a faceless company, because it's a like I said, it's a human to human thing. And that it baffles me that that's so overlooked so much of the time. People talk about B2B, and it's like, it's never just B2B. Like, we've got to put ourselves out there. We've got to have a face. We've got to be approachable. We've got to be personable. We've got to be able to engage with people that we work with. And I think having a story that relates to your business and your why and your purpose and why your company does what it does, for me, that's where the magic really happens. Because, we've got four co-founders. We've all got a personal reason. Like, I've had alcohol issues in the family. Andy is just fascinated with culture change. He's spent a lot of time living in China, and just is obsessed with that. Benny's our head brewer and co-founder. He loves a challenge, and to make a good tasting non-alcoholic beer was a huge challenge for him. So to do that on repeat as we release different SKUs, that's his why and his purpose of getting out of bed. And then somebody like Jordy Smith, for example, if you don't follow the sport, Jordy Smith is one of the world's top surfers. He's a co-founder in Heaps Normal. We've been friends since we were kind of 11, 12 years old. For him, he's come runner-up to being a world champion twice, once to Kelly Slater, once to John Florence, who are both multiple world champions. And it's like, for him, his reason of being involved in this, because he's looking for a competitive edge. He's looking for, how can he go out and socialize, not be obliged to have a beer, and wake up in the morning and be at his ultimate peak performance. He's literally an Olympic athlete. So we all have these reasons, and to share that story through the business lens, through the brand of the company, like, I don't know why you wouldn't do that, to be honest, because it just resonates with people. Like, if we were just a logo on a page with a product story, we're not getting that kind of red brain, green brain kind of thing going that you guys do so well. It's the reason that, when Apple talk about their, when the iPod came out, it was never the width and the height and then this, like, that stuff's there if you want it, but it's a million songs in your pocket. Like that kind of green brain. There's a million songs in my pocket. All right, cool. I'm going to take my card out and buy one of these things, because it's really talking to people on an emotional level. And I think if you can do that from a founder through the business, you've got all the more likelihood of really engaging with people that are potentially prospects for your company.
So you've been through burnout. You've also just been through, like, being under the pump. You've also got, like, the legacy of your father and the extreme consequences of that, like, at scale type thing. How, from a lifestyle perspective, other than the business and the purpose, from a lifestyle perspective, from a home perspective, from a personal habits or routines perspective, again, maybe a two-part question. A, what did you do to kind of dig yourself out of that burnout hole personally? And what are some of the habits or the things that are stuck that you now do differently as a result of that?
My initial kind of, it's weird because I've obviously grown up in the creative industry, and for right or wrong, it's renowned for all-nighters and crazy pressure, big pitches, and all that kind of stuff like that. And I think if anything, working in an agency before I started Electric and Analog was the preface to burnout, because just, literally not going home for 3 days, sleeping on the couch in the reception for 2 hours before a meeting starts, and living off pizza and Red Bull for the entire week is not good for you physically, mentally, emotionally, and everything else in between. Going through the burnout thing and starting journaling and starting kind of really taking life seriously was the absolute game changer for me. It's my routine beforehand would be having a few beers on the weekend, whatever, no kind of structure, just working all night, all that kind of stuff. And I think if anything, going through the burnout stuff, it really makes you reevaluate what's important. And for me, it started with organization, just being like meticulously organized. If anything's too complicated for me, I get super overwhelmed, and I tend not to do it. So, and I know your point of view on inbox zero, and that's probably another conversation. But things like just having a clear computer and not having a bunch of browsers open, and just having a to-do list every day, and then just really kind of exposing myself to content that I knew would help. So, for example, you did a podcast with somebody, and his name has just slipped my mind, and you'll probably know who he was, where he color codes his calendar in terms of like green is,
Tim Dwyer.
revenue generating activities. Yeah, exactly. Tim Dwyer, what a legend. He runs Bob now, right? I think.
Yeah.
Right, Bob. And then being able to have that overview look of, like on a Sunday night before I go to bed, I've planned out my week. And before the burnout thing, like my calendar was like, today was super busy. Tomorrow wasn't so busy. The day after was kind of quiet. The next 12 months are completely empty, but I was busy every single day doing busy work. And then going through the burnout and reading things, and like I said, watching videos on YouTube and reading articles and books and all that kind of stuff. It was just holistically recreating every touch point in my life. So going to bed early and getting enough sleep, eating properly, cutting out things like alcohol that weren't good for me. One of the most defining moments for me was I was referred to a kinesiologist by a friend of mine, and went to go see this guy. He's in Sydney in Double Bay. His name's Dr. 𝘀𝗵cie. I can't recommend him highly enough to anybody. I didn't really understand what it was about. I thought it was some weird witch doctor thing. But you go in there, you have a conversation. He asks you a bunch of questions, and as ridiculous as it sounds, you put your arm out, and he asks you a question and tries to push your arm down, and you're supposed to keep it up, and your arm doesn't go down. And then he asks you another question, and it doesn't go down, and eventually your arm goes down, and he goes, okay, and he basically takes you through this process of going, between the ages of 14 and 15, something happened with you and your brother, and that's why you've got back pain. And you start crying. You can't believe it. You're just like, oh, this is insane. But then you start kind of dealing with that trauma. And, I've been reading things like, like people have back pain and hip pain and knee pain. And there's a belief that like you have this subconscious memory in the back of your head of something that happened to you when you were really young that is literally was so traumatic for you that it sat there that you're not even aware that it's in your subconscious mind, and it's letting off toxins that are giving you physical pain in parts of your body. And it's a really weird thing. Like I didn't believe it at first, but then the more I've kind of looked into it and researched it, it's so true. Like, my brother and I had a pretty volatile relationship growing up because we were so competitive. We're from kind of a broken family. Healing the rift with him, like my back pain got easier, as ridiculous as that sounds. And, eating the right food and going to bed early and being meticulously planned and saying no to things as well. Like that was a big thing for me. I was a yes man for everything. And learning to say, I'm not going to take that meeting because it's not going to be a good use of my time, and learning to challenge the way we've always done things. Like, by default, you get an hour-long meeting put in your calendar. I keep going on about Gary Vee, but he said something in a video I saw once going like, this is a 14-minute meeting. It shouldn't be a second longer than that. And like, when you start realizing you don't have to take an hour-long meeting, you can get it done in 12 minutes. It allows you to kind of really get shit done, as we say in Dent, tick those boxes and time boxing my calendar every day. Like, I know now for the next month, like what I'm doing in 2 weeks' time on a Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, when previous I wouldn't. I'd just be like kind of day to day, kind of, you know, combat mode and defending stuff and living in my inbox. So it's been a journey, and it's certainly changed things. And weird. I feel like when you're in the middle of something, you start questioning it, and when you come out of it, you realize that everything really does happen for a reason. So super grateful.
Kinesiology's mad. My mum's a kinesiologist, so I get it. And she would have people come in. She's in Perth. She would have people come in because their baby's crying all the time, right? Just like a real grouchy, grumpy, unhappy baby. And my mum Gloria would say, it's not about the baby. Let me have a conversation with you. And she'd do the same stuff, the balancing, and she'd find, and it's like, I don't know, it's like we've got these energetic blockages that are creating an electromagnetic weakness in the nervous system, which shows in a muscle drop. And it sounds so much like voodoo. It sounds so much like woo-woo. But she would go in and balance the mum and balance the dad and help them kind of recombobulate their energy systems, and the baby would just be the most chilled out little baby from then on. And it was like she had, a waiting list a mile long for a while with just parents in that sort of zone. She just went like wildfire. And it really sort of blows your mind. I had really bad lower back pain for years, and I think it came from bartending. I was a bartender for like a year in Sydney over the Olympics, and unhealthy, late nights, no exercise, big kind of like 1.5, 2 litre bottles of like vodka spinning around, flare bar. Anyway, it was just a bad lower back. And then I went to Vipassana, which is like a 10-day silent meditation. And I'm there on day 8, and I'm in the lunch break where you're not meant to be a meditator, you don't have to be a meditation. But I went and I took my mattress off my bed because it was the first time I went. So you have to sleep in their kind of accommodation. Took the mattress on the bed, laid on the slats because it was hot. And I just decided I was going to do this focused meditation on my spine. And after 8 solid days of meditating 10 hours a day, more, your brain gets pretty dialed in. And anyway, I just zoned in on this section, this maybe 4-inch section on my lower back, and I just observed it with just intensity. And I'm observing it, watching it, and then all of a sudden, through nothing of my own, my body twitched like that. I heard this pop, and I've never had lower back pain since. And no shit, that was like, wow, that was my first time. I've done it 3 times since then. I think I'm going to do it again soon. It keeps coming back to me. I think I'm being called. But that was like, wow. And then I had like an actual inner world experience, which was like, that was a physical wow. And then I had a different inner world wow like the next time I went. But it's just mad how psychosomatic the world and our body and everything is. And it's so easy to get, for me at least, to get disconnected from that with business and work and what I do, and I'm sure what you do. It's so cerebral, like it's concepts and whiteboards and strategy and it's so easy to get disconnected from the body, right? Yeah. You said journaling a couple of times. I have always journaling is something I would like to say I do every day. I would like to be the dude that's been like, man, I've been journaling for like my whole life. Look at that bookshelf. That's like the chronicle of my life. I've always struggled to stick it. And I'm just curious as to your process. Did you always do it? Did you just start doing it? Do you have a process? Do you have any prompts? Like, give me the lowdown.
Yeah, perfect. So, I started when I was in a really bad headspace. I started kind of just writing down how I felt, and it became kind of pretty therapeutic. And it kind of allowed me to take a step back and look at what I'd put down on a page. I do find it quite tricky to keep it up. So I found this kind of this solution a few months ago, which is a game changer. Again, I keep saying the word game changer. I don't know why, but so every morning every night I write my to-do list for the next day. Then I go and block out my time calendar to do the things on the to-do list. And then what I do is right at the top of the page when I've got the date. So like, today's date, you know, and then I've got H, G, and L, and I only fill those out in the morning. And what those things are is H is something you have to get done today. So no matter what happens before the end of the day, it's the one thing that today has to be ticked off and get done. The G is something that you're grateful for. So, that's varies from being able to work from home, which I enjoy. It's having a beautiful wife and children and a family, being able to go for a surf whenever I need to, and those kind of things. And the L is to let go of something that is holding you back. So I do that every single day. And it really gets you to think differently because you know what the one thing you've got to get done is. You're practicing gratitude, and you've got to let go of something is holding you back. So I went through a phase of being under pressure, being quite irritable and snappy, and my gorgeous little 5-year-old daughter would ask me something and I'd snap at her. My wife would be like, babe, you can't be doing that. So little things like that, you write those things down. And I feel like that's a really sustainable way to do things because it's not a huge commitment to write this whole list of things every single day. It's just something you can do every day, 3 little things, H, G, and L, have to get done, grateful for, let go. And it's really, really helped me.
What about diet? Because you cut out booze. Were you a drinker?
I wasn't a big drinker. I just go out with friends and then not really know when to stop, to be completely honest. So I've cut that out almost completely. I mean, I'll have an odd half a glass of wine or a beer every now and again. But I mean, the days of going out to a pub just to drink are very, very far behind me. Eating, my wife is a vegetarian, so I'm absolutely not a vegetarian, but I've definitely cut down meat. Exercise every morning. There's Joe Wicks in the UK, the body coach, is an amazing kind of guy to follow for that. He's got so much free content on his website, doing 15-minute HIIT sessions every morning where it's 30 seconds of intense burpees or running on the spot, 30 seconds rest, and then it goes to like 40 seconds and 20 seconds of rest, and just sweating for 15 minutes every day. The cold shower technique. I've done all of this stuff, and I really do try and do it every single day. And the one thing for me that was such an eye opener was talking to the kinesiologist I mentioned. He said to me, like, what's your thing? Like, what gets you really excited to do, like a hobby? And I was like, surfing. Like, surfing for me, started surfing when I was like 11 years old. Like, I was sponsored as a kid and made a bunch of teams and events and blah, 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 blah. And then he said to me, when was the last time you surfed? I was like, it was about 6 weeks ago. And he's like, how far are you from the beach? And I'm like, 5-6 minute drive. And he's like, all right, you need a surfboard. I'm like, I can't, I've got so much work to do. I've got to look after the kids. I need to leave next to go and do shopping or whatever she's got to do. And he really summed it up perfectly and said, like, your cup is empty, but you're trying to look after everybody else. And he said, it's exactly like when you get in an airplane and they say, if the gas masks come down, put yours on first before your kids, because if you're suffocating, you're not going to be able to help your family. And it's so true, and it goes against everything we know because, it's, for me, I felt really selfish going for a surf because by the time I've left the house, got everything ready, put on my wetsuit, waxed up, surfed for an hour and a bit, got home, I'm 2 hours gone, and I was like, well, Monday to Friday I'm working my ass off, like ridiculous hours. The weekend is like family time, right? But I'm also trying to do a bit of work to get ahead for the week, and so it goes against like everything I stood for. And what Dr. 𝘀𝗫 said was like, it's absolutely pivotal that you do this, and it's actually the opposite of what you think. It's not selfish, it's selfless, because if you've got a full cup and you're resting and recuperating and you're sleeping properly, eating well, and you're doing things that bring you genuine joy, you're going to be able to be better at what you do at work, with your family, with your staff, with your clients, because you've had that time away and you've had that time to kind of get it out of your system and really feel genuinely good about doing something you really enjoy. Like yours is life-saving, right? Like, am I right in saying that?
I mean, not anymore. I mean, I'm in Jindabyne now, so I haven't been I haven't been to a beach in almost 12 months. And so I've picked up archery and weightlifting. Really? Yeah. And there's a real I got to be honest, it was very much Joe. There was this episode of Joe Rogan talking about some of the philosophy of archery. And
Was it with Shane Dorian, a pro surfer by any chance?
no, it wasn't with Shane, but I know he's gone hunting with Shane a few times
Yeah.
in Hawaii. No, it would have been with a guy called knock on archery, I forget, John Dudley, who was his coach. And anyway, he talked in, I can't remember his words, but what I got was this beautiful balance of the masculine and the feminine, right? You can't force a shot. You can't direct a shot. You need to let a shot go, right? And if you're telling the shot to go, you're doing it wrong, right? There's this process of putting yourself in a position to hold tension in a way where it releases itself. And it sounds crazy. And there's this other book called The Zen of Archery. And like legit Zen of archery, like Japanese Zen archers and stuff. And that really spoke to me, and it spoke to this kind of duality that I think I have running through me, which is this well, probably a bit of a deficit, very cerebral, like goals, make stuff happen. So the kind of archetypal masculine, not like, you know what I mean, as opposed to not enough of the flow, the feminine, the grace. And I think that was definitely a deficit. And I got that from surfing. But Bondi was never a great beach to surf on. And so I got into life-saving and driving the boats and a boat train. But there's not the same flow in that. It's still very mission critical. We're getting through waves. We're doing rescues in the break. Like you got 8-foot surf, you got people in the water, you got a 24 horsepower boat, you're maneuvering around there. Like you're definitely in the no mind space. You're in a reactive, not so much reactive. Maybe it is a flow state, but I didn't get the same quietness from that. It's intense, and I love the intensity of it. I got it from surfing, and I get it from archery. And so when I'm out there, and the beauty of like the property that we've got is I've got, you know, a bunch of different distances and targets lined up, and the first few shots suck, right? But then when your head gets into it, when my head gets into it, and when I go through this process and hit this sort of zone of relaxed tension, it's weird. The less you aim, the more you hit the targets. The less you try and hit the targets, the more you hit the targets. Anyway, it's been a really interesting sort of journey. So where I used to go for a surf or a swim down the beach, now I go out and I shoot some darts.
It's so funny, isn't it? Like, and it's funny how like, you know, the first one, like the same as surfing, like genuinely the first wave you catch is just a dud, and then the next one just flows, like you just saying. It's like, mate, it's like cooking. Like the first pancake's always a shit pancake, isn't it? It's really weird. Don't know why.
It is weird like that. I also just want to ask, like, because you're in such a creative space, do you ever do anything around like supplements or nootropics or any of that sort of stuff to kind of like enhance creativity or focus at all?
I have so got prescribed a bunch of supplements from the kinesiologist I mentioned, which is really helpful just with gut health and all that kind of stuff like that. But recently, I'd say probably 6 months ago, I got into mushrooms, which is insane. So there's a company called Life Cycle. The guy's based in Byron Bay, and they're these mushroom drops. You put them in your water or your juice or your tea or your coffee. The lion's mane mushroom in particular is insane for things like concentration and productivity and sleeping well. But there's different kind of mushroom strands. It's like a liquid mushroom. It comes with a dropper, and you put it in, and it can do everything from you know, gut health to better skin and nails and hair and concentration and being present and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, definitely recommend that, because I think that's, for me, that's been a kind of a really interesting thing to do.
And you notice like the difference?
Yeah, like I really have. Like I've sat down. I've always had a big problem with procrastination and being distracted, and I feel like if I'm organized and I'm on top of things and I have my mushroom shots in the morning, I'm super focused, and I think it's the sum of all parts for me. Like I don't think one of these things work. Like um, what I've been kind of experimenting with the last few months is doing a 90-minute focus sprint where you turn your phone off, there's no distractions, and right, I'm not going to look at social media or the news or look at my phone or anything like that for 90 minutes, go deep. And I found like if you've had a good night's sleep, you've done some exercise, you've had a good breakfast, for me, it's like having a shot of coffee with a drop of mushroom in it. And that's all pre-set up, and I just have to have less choices. Like, as ridiculous as it sounds, like, you know, there's a reason Steve Jobs always wore like a black t-shirt and jeans, because it was one less decision he had to make every day. So I've got into a habit of like, the night before, and I know it sounds silly, particularly working from home, but like I take my clothes out and my shoes and I lay everything at the end of our bed, like on the stool, so that I know in the morning I just get up, shower, and I put that on. I don't have to sit there and go, what am I going to wear today? And it's funny, I've got a little girl who's 5, and she definitely didn't get it from me. She definitely got it from her mom, but she's like has these like he's like mini meltdowns where she's like, I don't know what I'm going to wear today, and I just giggle because I'm like, I figured that out last night. Like, you need to start doing what I do. You're going to be okay. It's a funny one. So just avoiding distractions and things that get in the way, and just kind of making sure that mentally, physically, emotionally, like you're in a good place. I found for like productivity and getting things done has been such a good thing.
Mate, I love it. If there were some kind of guiding principles now with the lessons that you've learned, right, from your father, from the burnout, and also just from the victory of building this kick-ass brand with HEAPS NORMAL, and not to mention the other brands that you've made, but I think my sense is you've got a much more personal connection to this one, right? Because it was like, we want to test this, we want to make it happen. Do you have any like personal guiding principles or philosophies that you come back to as a staple?
I've got heaps, and I don't know how long you've got, Glenn. We're going to be here for a while.
Well, I'm more curious. Because I think everybody's probably got some that. What I'm curious about, are there any defaults that are kind of like in the same way that you're now talking about like ice baths and mushrooms and all that kind of stuff, are some things you go to. Do you have any go-to ones that are like ideas that you go to quite regularly, or philosophies or principles?
I do. So my grandfather was a guy named Raymond Prattley, who was a dad to me more than anybody. He was my absolute hero. He passed away. Him passing away was a kind of catalyst for me to leave London and move to Australia. And he was an incredible man. He was born in Coventry in World War II during the Blitz. He was literally bombed, like neighbors, limbs everywhere after Hitler bombed Coventry, because it was the industrial capital of England. A really tough life, like 7 brothers and sisters, scrounging for food. He built a company called Midland Diamond Tooling, which was the tool that cut a diamond back in the day. The only thing that could cut a diamond was a diamond. So his company was a precision engineering firm that used to make these diamond tools. So obviously they're worth a lot of money. And he taught me a number of principles around that. Like, one of the things I'll never forget was, always looking at things from a different angle. And it's just so applicable, and like what happened with him and his story that's resonated with me for so long into the everyday. So for HEAPS NORMAL, for example, I went and saw one of the top craft beer companies in Australia. I went and saw a big contract brewery, and I went and saw 2 or 3 other people who I'd kind of prepared a little deck and like what this was, and it just got like shut down. Just like, no, I don't think this is going to work, and like feeling pretty deflated, but like never taking no for an answer was something. Like, if you really want something, there's got to be a way to make that happen. So that's something that's really kind of worked to me. The other thing was looking at things from a different angle. So for me, it was like, with HEAPS NORMAL at the time, I was knocking on the doors of these companies that already made beer, asking them if they could help me make a non-alcoholic beer. So, and we're getting the door slammed in my face so many times. It was like, well, how can we look at things from a different angle to try and get this over the line? So that's, I approached Andy, and instead of going to a beer company, it was me going to a friend going like, let's do this together. Like, what do you think, this could come? And that comes back to a principle my granddad told me about always looking at things from a different angle. And one of the most perfect stories of that was, back to his company. It was in Coventry. It was a pretty industrial, like kind of big factory floor space, and they had this this kind of warehouse tooling section that housed all the tools. And obviously, the only thing that could cut a diamond is a diamond. So the tools had diamonds on the end of them. They're worth a bit of money. And one day, one of the managers came in and said to my granddad, "Hey, someone's stealing parts out of the warehouse, out of the storeroom, and we know who it is." So my granddad was like, "What do you mean?" And he told him the whole story. He said, we've seen him doing it. We haven't approached him yet. And it was this guy named John. John just happened to be the best machinist in the factory. Like, he was so skilled at what he did because it was such a specialist thing to do that he was irreplaceable, essentially. So my granddad's faced with this kind of situation where it's like, all right, on face value, I've got to fire this guy because he's stealing from me. But let me try and look at things from a different angle here. Like, if I fire him, I'm going to probably spend months trying to replace him. I'm going to probably spend a fortune in recruitment fees trying to replace him. Let's look a little bit deeper and look at things from a different angle. So he called John in, had a conversation with him, realized that John had been battling financially. His son wasn't very well, so there was a bunch of money he needed to help his son out, and he'd been asking for a pay rise for some time and hadn't had one. So my granddad called him in and said to him, "Look, been thinking about it for a while. I'm going to give you a promotion and a pay rise. And one of your new parts of your new job is to manage the storeroom and make sure nothing goes missing." And overnight, my granddad kept his most skilled machinist. The stealing stopped. He had a very engaged and happy member of staff who got a pay rise and could help his son out. And it just changed everything. And it's so important, like, looking at things from a different angle, because if, without that story in my mind, and that was me, I would have sacked him straight away. Like, you're stealing from me, you're fired. It's obvious. But looking at it from a different angle just changes everything. So there's a number of those little nuggets that I've been taught over the years that I think back to a lot, and I think really play a big part in what we do today.
Mate, I love it. I reckon that's probably the title of the podcast, looking at things from a different angle. Bam. Mate, this has been cool. Good chat. What a story, man.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for hearing me out and letting me share it on this platform of yours. I'm very grateful for you, Glenn. Like, I think what you guys do and what you've done, what we've just been through coming out of the program, and if anyone's listened to this, if it's not cut out, like, I'm not being paid to say this, it genuinely changes things. So I would highly recommend enrolling as a KPI because it really does make a difference.
Man, I just want to acknowledge you. Like, I've seen the work you do, and it's just exceptional. But there's something I just really respect about anyone. But in this example, specifically you, that can go from a dark night of the soul, how do I create something valuable, beautiful, meaningful from this? And I am just genuinely, I cannot wait for this box of beer to arrive, because I just think it's the coolest thing in the world, right? And to have this itch, this doubt of like, is this methodology, is this process we've got kind of really any good? You know what? Let's just eat our own dog food and do it for ourselves. And that cascade into a $7.5 million valuation like a couple of years later. Like, that's just awesome. And mate, it's a rare story, and the shift around like health, wellness, balance, it's just it's really cool. And I think there's a real deficit in that thinking in the small business world, because so many people, they're working for the business doesn't work for them. And my hope is that listeners of this have a bit of a recalibration themselves, and maybe do a bit of journaling, and get on some mushrooms, and go for a surf. And so I just want to thank you, mate. I think it was a really cool story. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate you saying that, mate. Thanks very much.
All right, brother. Beautiful people. As always, be brave, have fun. Let's go make a dent in the universe. Out.